I want a divorce.
Some men mistake a woman's silence for weakness. Some men look at softness and see something lesser. Some men spend years climbing, using every hand that reaches out to help them, stepping on every heart that trusted them, and they never once look down. Until the day they do. And by then, it's already too late. This is the story of Diana Mercer, a woman who loved completely, who gave quietly, who was told she was not enough, not thin enough, not polished enough, not worthy of the image her husband was building for himself. So he threw her away, and he never once asked whose daughter she was. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Diana Mercer had a laugh that filled a room. It wasn't the delicate, controlled laugh of the women her husband now preferred to be seen with. The ones who laughed with their mouths barely open, careful never to disturb their lipstick or their composure. Diana's laugh started somewhere deep in her chest and came out like it meant it. Like joy was something worth committing to. It was one of the first things her husband Marcus had ever said he loved about her. That was 11 years ago. Now he looked at her across the breakfast table like she was a problem he hadn't yet figured out how to solve. "You're wearing that today," he said, not looking up from his phone. Diana looked down at her dress. It was a soft floral wrap dress, comfortable and pretty. She had put it on feeling good about herself, which was becoming increasingly rare. "I thought it was nice," she said carefully. "It's fine." He set his own phone down and poured his coffee. "I just think you should make more of an effort, especially with what's coming up." "What's coming up?" "The Morrison account signing. The company dinner next Friday." He glanced up at her, not at her face, but at her, the whole of her, the way a man looks at something he is calculating the value of. "I've been working toward this promotion for 2 years, Diana. The partners pay attention to everything. Optics matter. Optics." She was 39 years old, and her husband of 9 years was using the word optics to describe her body. She picked up her coffee cup and said nothing. She had been saying nothing for a long time. It hadn't always been this way. When Marcus Mercer met Diana Whitfield at a charity fundraiser 12 years ago, he had been a junior account manager at Callaway and Drake, a mid-sized investment firm with a strong reputation and an extremely competitive internal culture. It was ambitious, magnetic, and broke. He had a good suit he rotated carefully, and a smile that made people feel like the most important person in the room. Diana had been there with her father. She hadn't told Marcus who her father was that night. She never led with it. It was something she had decided early in her adult life, that she wanted to be known for herself, not for the name she carried. So when Marcus asked her what she did, she told him she worked philanthropy coordination, which was true. She managed the charitable giving arm of her family's foundation, which was also true. She simply left out the part about whose foundation it was. Marcus had been interested in her from the first conversation. She was warm and funny and disarmingly real in a room full of performative people. He called her the next day. He took her to a small Italian restaurant, not an impressive one, because he couldn't afford impressive yet. And she had loved that. She loved that he was trying. They were married 18 months later. For a long time, they were happy. Marcus moved up at the firm. Diana supported every step, hosting dinners, charming clients, remembering the names of partners' wives, and their children's birthdays and their anniversary trips. She was the kind of woman who made a man look good without ever making it obvious that she was doing it. And then, in the 5th year of their marriage, Diana got pregnant. The pregnancy was hard. She gained weight, more than expected. The kind that doesn't simply disappear after delivery. And when their son was born, a healthy, beautiful boy they named James, Diana's body held onto the evidence of what she had been through. She wasn't the same size she had been at their wedding. She wasn't the same size she had been the year before. She was softer, rounder, changed in the way that women who have grown a life inside them are often changed. She thought Marcus understood that. She was wrong. It happened gradually, the way erosion happens. Not a single dramatic collapse, but a slow wearing away of something that had once been solid. Marcus started going to the gym before dawn. He started wearing better suits. He started coming home later and explaining less. He started looking at Diana across rooms at company events with an expression she could only describe as embarrassed, as if she were something he had ordered that had arrived differently than expected. He never said it directly, not at first. Instead, he said things like, "Have you thought about getting back into a routine? Dr. Patel's wife just did that program. You should ask her about it. I just think you'd feel better about yourself if you made more of an effort." And Diana, who had loved this man completely and built her adult life inside their marriage, tried. She dieted. She exercised. She bought new clothes. She did everything except shrink back to something she no longer was, because her body had done the profound and irreversible work of motherhood, and it would never again be 29. Marcus could not forgive her for it. The real conversation happened on a Wednesday night in November. James was at her mother's for the week. The house was quiet. Diana had made dinner, a real dinner, candles and everything, because she had been feeling the distance between them, like a physical weight, and she wanted to close it. Marcus came home late. He looked at the table and something crossed his face. Not gratitude, not warmth, resignation. He sat down. He ate in near silence. And then he set his fork down and said, in the tone of a man who has been rehearsing something, "Diana, I need to be honest with you." She set her own fork down. Her hands were very still. "I've been thinking about this for a long time," he said. "And I think we both know that things between us haven't been right for years." "Marcus, let me finish." He looked at her then, directly, which he hadn't done in months. "I'm at a critical point in my career. The Morrison deal is the biggest thing this firm has seen in a decade, and I am positioned to be the man who closes it. When that happens, everything changes. The partnerships, the profile, the visibility." He paused. "I need to be building a certain kind of life, a certain kind of image. And I think," he exhaled, "I think you and I want different things." Diana heard every word. She also heard everything underneath the words. "You're telling me," she said quietly, "that I'm bad for your image." He didn't deny it. He looked away. "I'm saying that I think we've grown apart. I'm saying I think it would be better for both of us." "Say it plainly, Marcus." Her voice was very calm. "Look at me and say it plainly." He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something she had been trying not to see for 2 years. Not cruelty exactly, but something worse. Indifference. "I want a divorce," he said, "and I think you should move out." Diana moved out 11 days later. She took James. She took her clothes. She took the photo albums and the cast-iron skillet her grandmother had given her, and approximately nothing else. She did not tell Marcus where she was going. She did not tell him whose house she went to. She drove 40 minutes outside the city, turned through a set of private gates, and pulled up in front of a home that most people in this city would recognize immediately if they knew whose it was. Her father was waiting on the front steps. Edward Whitfield was 71 years old, silver-haired, and possessed of the particular stillness of a man who has spent 5 decades making enormous decisions and never once regretted learning patience. He was also, to anyone paying attention to the financial architecture of this city, one of the most quietly powerful men alive. He was the founder, sole owner, and chairman of Whitfield Capital Group, a private equity firm with $100 billion in assets under management. The same firm that, 6 weeks earlier, had quietly finalized its position as the majority stakeholder in Morrison Global. The company whose account Marcus Mercer was currently celebrating as the career-defining deal of his life. Edward Whitfield opened his arms when Diana got out of the car. She walked into them and cried for the first time since the night Marcus had asked her to leave. "I've got you," her father said. "I've always had you." She pulled back and wiped her face. "He doesn't know, Dad. He has no idea." Edward Whitfield looked at his daughter. At the tiredness in her eyes, the dignity still present in the way she stood even after everything. And he said nothing for a moment. Then, "No, he doesn't." Another pause. "The signing is in 6 weeks." Diana looked at her father. Edward looked back at his daughter. "I think," he said carefully, "that you should be there." Diana had 6 weeks. She didn't spend them crying, though there were nights, after James was asleep and the house was quiet, when she sat in the window seat of her childhood bedroom and let herself feel the full weight of 9 years dismantled. She felt it completely, the way you have to feel something completely before you can set it down. And then she set it down. She called her old friend Serena, who had a law degree and no patience for nonsense, and they spent 3 days going through every document Diana had. The prenuptial agreement Marcus had insisted upon was examined line by line. It was, as Diana had always quietly known, not as airtight as Marcus believed. She had signed it at 28, trusting and in love, but her father's lawyers had reviewed it at the time and made certain, very quietly and without Marcus's awareness, that Diana was protected. She met with her father's legal team on a Tuesday morning. She met with her own financial advisor on Thursday. She began, for the first time in years, to think about herself not as Marcus Mercer's wife, but as Diana Whitfield. A woman with her own name, her own mind, and a family legacy that made Marcus's entire career look like a rounding error. She also, in the 5th week, did something she hadn't done in years. She went shopping. Not because Marcus had told her to make more of an effort. Not to fix something, or correct something, or shrink herself into something more acceptable. She went because she wanted to. She tried on dresses in her actual size and bought the ones that made her feel like herself, polished and real, and entirely unapologetic. She found a deep navy dress with clean, architectural lines. She found shoes that meant business. She had her hair done by the woman who had done it for her wedding, who hugged her when she came in and asked no questions, and simply made her look exactly like who she was. On the morning of the signing, Diana looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. She thought about the woman who had sat at that candlelit dinner table and listened to her husband tell her she was bad for his image. She thought about what that woman deserved to see happen next. Then, she picked up her bag and walked out the door. The Morrison Global signing was held in the top-floor boardroom of Callaway and Drake. Marcus had been building to this day for 2 years. He had lobbied for the Morrison account before anyone else saw its potential. He had flown to 3 countries to court their executives. He had restructured their proposal 4 times and delivered a final presentation that had earned him a standing ovation from the senior partners. He had been told, quietly, as these things always are, that when this deal closed, his name would be on the door. Full partner, the top of the firm. everything he had worked for. He arrived that morning in his best suit, charcoal gray, custom fitted, bought specifically for this day. He shook hands and accepted congratulations and stood at the head of the boardroom with the easy confidence of a man who believes the world has arranged itself for his benefit. The Morrison Global delegation arrived at 10 o'clock. Their CEO, a compact, precise man named Gerald Fitch, led the group. Behind him came his CFO, two senior attorneys, and a representative from their majority stakeholder, standard protocol when a deal of this size was being finalized. The stakeholder rep needed to be present for the final signatures. Marcus barely glanced at the delegation as they filed in. He was reviewing his notes. He was thinking about his speech. He was thinking about the phone call he'd made last night to a woman named Claudia, who was 29 years old and had never been pregnant, and whose collarbones Marcus had decided were better for his image than a decade of loyalty. He did not look up when the final person walked through the boardroom door. Gerald Fitch extended his hand across the table. "Mr. Mercer, before we begin, I'd like to introduce the representative from our majority stakeholder, Whitfield Capital Group." Marcus looked up. The room did not actually go quiet. People were still shuffling papers, clicking pens, murmuring to colleagues. But in Marcus Mercer's experience of that moment, everything stopped. Diana stood at the end of the conference table in a navy dress that fit her perfectly, her hair swept back, her posture straight and unhurried, holding a leather portfolio with the Whitfield Capital Group emblem on the cover. She looked, Marcus would later struggle to articulate, like someone who had always been exactly this powerful and had simply been waiting for the right room to walk into. She looked at him. She did not smile immediately. She let him have one full, uninterrupted moment to understand everything, who she was, who her father was, whose money had been behind this deal the entire time, whose approval his entire future depended upon. She let him feel the architecture of it fall into place around him, and then she smiled. Gracious, warm, absolutely devastating. "Marcus," she said, "it's good to see you." He couldn't speak. Gerald Fitch, who knew exactly who Diana was and had been thoroughly briefed by situation by Edward Whitfield, pulled out her chair with genuine respect. "Miss Whitfield will be representing Whitfield Capital's interests today and going forward," he said. "She'll also be joining the Morrison board in an advisory capacity." "Ms. Whitfield, not Mrs. Mercer. Ms. Whitfield." Marcus heard that like a door closing. He stopped. He looked at Diana. She was opening her portfolio, reviewing something, utterly composed. "I wasn't aware that Whitfield Capital was the majority stakeholder." Diana looked up. "It's been a matter of public record for about 6 weeks. A small pause. "You might have seen it if you'd been paying attention to things other than the promotion." One of the junior associates at the far end of the table coughed. Gerald Fitch studied his pen. Marcus sat down slowly because his legs had stopped being reliable. The signing proceeded with excruciating precision. Every page, every initial, every signature line. Diana moved through the documents with the confidence of someone who had grown up watching one of the most accomplished ex-deal makers in the country work. Because she had. She asked 2 questions that revealed, to every senior person in the room, that she understood this deal at a structural level, that Marcus, for all his preparation, had not fully reached. When Gerald Fitch complimented her on a particular insight regarding the revenue sharing clause, she simply nodded and said, "My father taught me to read the whole document, not just the parts that benefit you." Nobody looked at Marcus when she said it. That was almost worse. The moment that Marcus would replay for the rest of his life came at the end. Gerald Fitch was collecting the signed documents. The attorneys were closing their briefcases. People were standing, stretching, congratulating each other in the warm and slightly relieved way people do when something enormous has finally been made official. Richard Calloway, the senior founding partner of the firm, the man whose opinion had shaped Marcus's entire career, the man whose approval Marcus had spent 2 years engineering, crossed the room toward the Whitfield Capital representative. He extended his hand to Diana. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, "your father speaks very highly of you. We're honored to have Whitfield Capital's confidence in this partnership." He paused, and his expression shifted. "Just slightly. Just enough. I understand you may be looking for a wealth management home for a portion of the Whitfield portfolio going forward?" Diana shook his hand with a firm, easy grip. "We might be, yes. My father believes in relationships." Another pause. "The right ones." Richard Calloway nodded slowly. He glanced, briefly, almost involuntarily, at Marcus. Then he looked back at Diana. "Absolutely," he said. "Let's find time to talk." He did not ask Marcus to be part of that conversation. He walked away with Diana toward the windows. The city spread out below them, already deep in discussion. Marcus stood in the center of the boardroom. People moved around him. The room was emptying. Nobody stopped to include him. He had spent 2 years making himself indispensable to this deal. And in the space of 90 minutes, he had become the least important person in the room. The call came 4 days later. Marcus was summoned to Richard Calloway's office at 8 in the morning, a time that told him everything. Because Richard Calloway only scheduled 8 o'clock meetings for things he wanted finished before the day properly began. He sat across from the man who had once called him the firm's most promising future leader. Richard Calloway folded his hands on his desk. "Marcus," he said, "this is a difficult conversation." Marcus had spent 4 days preparing for it. He had prepared arguments, explanations, rebuttals. He had rehearsed the version of events that positioned him favorably. He had planned what to say. And then Richard Calloway said, "Whitfield Capital has formally requested that you not serve as lead contact on the Morrison account going forward." Everything Marcus had prepared turned to ash in his mouth. "They've been very professional about it," Richard continued. "No ultimatums, no demands. Simply a preference for a different relationship manager." He paused. "But given that Whitfield Capital now represents 40% of this firm's most significant new revenue stream, and given that Edward Whitfield has indicated he may be willing to expand that relationship considerably, their preferences carry significant weight." Marcus stared at him. "Richard, I built this deal. I brought Morrison to the table before anyone. And you'll be credited for that work," Richard said, in the tone of a man closing a door. "But the partnership going forward is not going to include you in a lead capacity." Another pause, heavier than the last. "And frankly, Marcus, given what I've learned about the personal circumstances here, I think it's best for everyone if we discuss restructuring your role at the firm more broadly." Restructuring, not partnership. Not his name on the door. Restructuring. "How broadly?" Marcus asked. His voice was very careful. Richard Calloway held his gaze for a moment. "We'll want you to step back from client-facing work for the time being. There's an internal analytics position. Still senior, still well compensated. But the trajectory you were on—" He stopped, started again. "The trajectory changes." Marcus left the building at 9:15. He sat in his car in the parking structure for 22 minutes. He thought about the candlelit dinner he had walked into and dismissed. He thought about the woman who had made it and the way she had sat across from him, so still, while he told her she wasn't enough. He thought about what he had thrown away, and then he thought about what it had cost him. They were not the same thing. He understood that now. One was irreplaceable. The other was a consequence. He started the car and drove. Diana didn't find out what happened to Marcus at the firm right away. She found out 3 weeks later when his attorney contacted hers to discuss revised settlement terms. Terms that were notably less aggressive than the original ones had been. She read the revised terms at her father's kitchen table on a Sunday morning, James playing in the garden outside. Her father sat across from her with his coffee, reading the newspaper, not commenting. "He lost the partnership," Diana said. Said Edward Whitfield. "Did you have anything to do with that?" He turned a page of the newspaper. "I had a conversation with Richard Calloway about the importance of personal integrity in professional partnerships. I may have expressed the view that character and business judgment are not as separable as some people like to believe." He looked up. "Is that having something to do with it?" Diana looked at her father for a moment. "I didn't ask you to do that," she said. "No," he agreed. "You didn't." He went back to his newspaper. Diana looked out at her son in the garden. This boy that Marcus had also underestimated. This small person who had watched his father look at his mother like she was a problem, and had pressed his face into Diana's full shoulder and said with the uncomplicated clarity of a 7-year-old, "I don't want to live with Daddy if he's mean to you, Mama." She thought about what it meant to be known, fully, completely, inconveniently known, wait and laugh and all, and loved without condition. She thought about the years she had spent trying to be smaller, quieter, more suitable. She thought about the navy dress. She signed the revised settlement papers on a Wednesday. She kept her name, Diana Whitfield, the name she had always had, the name she had carried quietly through 11 years of someone else's ambitions and offered freely to a man who had never understood what it was worth. She kept it. She built with it. 18 months later, Diana Whitfield was appointed to the board of Whitfield Capital Group as Director of Strategic Partnerships. The appointment was covered in 2 financial publications and 1 lifestyle magazine, which ran a photograph of her and her father at the firm's annual gala. She was laughing in the photo, that real, full laugh, the one that started in her chest and came out like it meant something. James was doing well in school. He had his mother's laugh. Marcus Mercer remained at Calloway and Drake in his restructured role. He was professionally competent and personally diminished, and he told the story of his marriage in ways that grew more favorable to himself each time he told it, which is what people do when they cannot bear the true version. He did not remarry quickly. He had, it seemed, developed a new understanding of what he had been looking for, and a new understanding of what he had found and discarded. Diana heard this from Serena, who heard it from someone who still worked at the firm. She heard it, and she felt not satisfaction exactly, not triumph, something quieter. She felt the particular peace of a woman who knows her own worth so completely that someone else's belated recognition of it lands like weather. Noted, not required. She went back to her work. She had a meeting at 2 o'clock. She had a son to pick up at 3:30. She had a laugh that filled a room. And she had never once, not for a single day of her life, been bad for anyone's image. She had simply been too good for one man's limited vision of what a woman was supposed to be. That was his failure. Not hers. It had never been hers. Some men mistake a woman's silence for weakness. Some men look at softness and see something lesser. Some men spend years climbing on the backs of people who love them and never once look down until the day they do. Diana Whitfield looked back, not with anger, not with bitterness, just with the quiet, unmistakable dignity of a woman who always knew exactly who she was. And that was the most devastating thing of all. If this story moved you, share it with a woman who needs to remember what she's worth. And if you've ever been a Diana, tell us in the comments. We read every single one.